Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait a few more moments to allow more people to attend, but we'll be starting very, very soon. Okay, let's make a start. Good morning, everybody. My name's Jenny Brown. I'm a literary agent based in Edinburgh. I wish I was with you all in Inverness right now for XpoNorth, but delighted that we can be online this year again. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this session. We are going to be discussing writing about nature. Now, recent years have seen a renaissance of writing about the natural world. And during the pandemic, nature writing has offered us probably a vicarious enchantment. This session is going to explore writing about nature and landscape through fiction, poetry, and non-fiction. And I'm really pleased to be talking to two fabulous writers today. Merryn Glover is a writer and a dramatist. In 2019, she was the first ever writer in residence for the Cairngorms National Park. Her second novel, just published, is Of Stone and Sky, set in the upper Spey Valley where she lives. It's been hailed as a paean to the bonds between people, their land and way of life. Her next project, which I hope she's going to be talking to us about also, is The Hidden Fires, a Cairngorms Journey with Nan Shepherd. Kathleen Jamie is an award-winning poet and essayist. Her writing is rooted in the landscape and culture of Scotland, as shown in her poetry and her acclaimed essay collections, Findings, Sightlines, and most recently, Surfacing. Last year, she edited the first ever collection of contemporary Scottish writing about nature and landscape called Antlers of Water. Together, we're going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and there's going to be a chance in the last 15 minutes or so for you to ask questions. We would love to hear from you. There's a chat function, or you can use the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. But I'm going to start by asking both of our writers to talk to us about their own experience of writing about landscape and nature. And Kathleen, could we start with you?
Well, I began what I'm now obliged to call nature writing about 15, possibly 20 years ago. And without any conception of what I was doing was nature writing. I was going to become something called nature writing. Nature writing then didn't exist. It was toe curling to say you're a nature writer. And I would never have done that. But I was interested in what was immediately nearby. Not least because I had small children back in them days, and travel was impossible. Travel meant getting to the post office before it shut, you know, down to the bottom of the park, because it was an epic. So I began to think, what traveling can I do that is amenable to getting back by flower to do the fish fingers? And so I began to think much more locally and much more nearby, and began writing out of that experience. And to my surprise, it became known as not nature writing, a mixture of nature and culture. You know, that's where I really like to be. I'm not terribly interested in wild nothingness. I'm interested in the intersection between nature and culture. So that's what those three books you showed, that's what they grew out of.
And can you say a little bit about Antlers of Water, how it came about, why it came about?
Antlers of Water came out of, like most of my work, came out of annoyance. I became annoyed about the fact that we have in Scotland these extraordinary landscapes and seascapes, but much of the writing and talking about those landscapes and seascapes was coming from out with Scotland, you know, on the telly or whatever. And I knew in my bones that we had an Indigenous group of writers who could do this. And I thought, but nobody's asked them, nobody's brought them together. I was also mindful of the fact that we have a big thing about Scottish crime fiction. And I was thinking, well, why crime fiction? Why can't we do our own landscape? So out of those twin annoyances, I proposed the idea of doing a collection, bringing together all the, not all the, gosh, no, a selected few of the nature and landscape writers I was aware of who were practicing in Scotland, just to see what it would look like. And the result was Antlers of Water, which I'm very proud of, I have to say.
How difficult was it to make the selection?
I did it in about 10 minutes in the back of an envelope, because it was there. The resources were there, you know. It was the difficult bit was when I knew I had reached a book length. You know, I had to exclude some people. That took a bit of finessing. There were some exclusions I'm not entirely happy with, but I had to stop somewhere. But really, there was no effort in finding the contributors.
And the title
comes from Norman McCaig. You can see the bookshelves behind me. I was sitting here, right here, thinking we need a title. And I thought, in these circumstances, what do? You go to Norman McCaig. So I pulled his collected poems off the shelf, opened it almost at random, and found the line Antlers of Water, and thought, thank you, Norman.
You say in the introduction, when we read and write, when we love our fellow creatures, when we walk on the beach, when we just listen and notice, we are not little cogs in the machine, but part of the remedy.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't think I can express it any better. I do believe that that's what is given to us as human beings. We don't need any special skills. We need the skills that we're born with, you know, and that's us. And we can go beyond ourselves, beyond our circumstances, park our worries just in the moment, you know. It takes a wee bit of training sometimes. You have to train your mind to find a value in it. You know? Many of us are brought up to find no value in the natural world around us, you know. We have to get on and get on and get our head down and get on and get a job and get on, you know. Park that for a minute and the world is laid out like a stupendous dream.
Is there anything that would unite the writers that you brought together? You've got, you know, I suppose, people like Jim Crumley, who has been writing about nature for a long time, and really a fantastic sort of elder statesman.
Exactly.
Yeah, in this genre, as well as newer writers like Amanda Thompson, Chitra Ramaswamy. Is there anything that you would say binds them together?
Well, I can tell you what does not bind them together is style. I was very anxious as a poet myself to include poetry, even experimental poetry, in the same volume as rather more traditional forms of writing. So no, I would say what binds them, apart from this being based in Scotland, of course, is their ability to notice and to foreground that noticing that we were just speaking about. Not to have the natural world there as a painted backdrop to human concerns, but to foreground it and bring it into, bring it into the foreground. And each of my contributors here, there are 20 of them, do that in different ways. So I think that's about it. Really.
And as a poet, as well as an essayist, what is the difference when you are writing about the natural world as a poet or an essayist? Does that differ as an experience for you?
As an experience for me personally, I think of my essays as extended poems because they can do things with narrative that you can't do in a poem. But otherwise, I don't know. I don't always know if I start a piece of work, if it's going to become a poem or an essay, or increasingly what I'm doing is some hybrid in between. So at the very, very, very beginning of a piece of work, you're not writing at all. You're intuiting or noticing, or you get a sort of aura or frisson around a thing. And you know, oh, this is going to become a piece of writing. How it ends up, way down the line, many drafts down the line, I can't predict that. And that's part of the excitement of it.
This is a good moment, Merryn, to bring you in, because you've been writing about the natural world as a fiction writer in Of Stone and Sky. And obviously you've had, and your next book's going to be non-fiction. Is there a difference in how you approach?
Yes, absolutely. I think just to kind of go back a little bit in terms of the origins of the nature element in my own writing, similarly to Kathleen, it's not something that I sort of saw myself as in the emerging of my writing over the years. But for me, its origins really have come in the importance of a sense of place. And for me, very much because I grew up and was born and brought up in South Asia, and I moved many times. Was at university in Australia. I've called Scotland home for 25 years, but have continued to move and travel in that time as well. So I've always been very interested in sense of belonging and identity, and the intersections between a landscape and culture and community, and how a place shapes people and how people shape the place. I'm very interested in migratory patterns, both of people as well as wildlife. And also, I suppose, in those dynamic tensions between conservation and change in a living and dynamic planet. And in that word remedy that came out there in the introduction to Antlers of Water, for me, those real questions around the sort of political relationships we have with the land in terms of justice, poverty, but also very much what is the road to regeneration and healing of both people and land. So that's been something that's been an important thread through my writing all along. And early on, there was a series of short stories that were set in Nepal, where I'd grown up and then gone back to work as an adult. Then my first novel was set in North India, where I'd been to school, and where landscape and setting was almost another character in that story. And then again with Of Stone and Sky, a novel set here, writing about the place in which I live and have lived for 15 years now, where in a sense it's my very first words were about the land and then a character emerging in that space. So back to your question about the difference in writing fiction and nonfiction, I think for me, I've been very driven by stories. So that's been where most of my writing has been in the past, with both fiction and drama. But the book I'm writing now in response to Nan Shepherd's work on the Cairngorms came initially as an invitation. And I just don't think I would have kind of had the audacity to try and write something in response to her. But it was an invitation from the publisher Polygon. And I just thought, okay, wow, this is a real opportunity. And here is a story. Here is the story of her engagement with this place, with these mountains. And what Polygon were quite interested in was my story as an Australian, brought up in Asia, brought up in the Himalayas, coming to encounter these mountains. What has that story been? And then how has my story intersected with hers in this same space, but across a very different period of time? And as a woman in my early 50s now, I'm the same age that she was when she was writing about them. You know, so there's some really interesting parallels in terms of our experience as women. Neither of us who would consider ourselves mountaineers or naturalists, both women who've been literature teachers and writers. And so those are some of the things that we have in common. But where we're very different is that she was incredibly rooted in this place in Aberdeenshire, where she was born and brought up, lived in the same bedroom for her entire life, apart from the nursing home at the very end. So she had an extraordinary depth of knowledge about this place. And for me, I come as somebody who's been through a whole range of other different places and cultures and communities. But actually, this is the longest I've lived anywhere in the world. So I've embraced this as home in a very different way. So it's those two stories, her story and my story, and how they intersect in these mountains, the Cairngorms, which is what's unfolding now in a work of nonfiction. But I suppose it's still kind of narrative that drives it, as was the case in my novels and short stories. Yeah.
Can you introduce your novel to us, and perhaps give us a bit of a flavour of it with a reading?
Sure.
It's a big novel. This is a novel that spans, what, a century, generations of a family, but so rooted in place.
Yes, yes. So it's set, as I said, in the upper strath of the River Spey, where I live, an area that's called Badnoch, the Gaelic name for the area, which means the drowned lands, because the River Spey routinely floods, and this is floodplain that we're living in here. And the Spey winds across the sort of northwest of the Cairngorms Mountains. So we look up to these mountains, and the novel explores both the life of this farming community within the Strath and this sporting estate here, but also journeys up into the mountains on a couple of occasions. And this particular passage that I'll read right now is about a walk that this family does. So it's mainly a contemporary novel, actually, but I realized as soon as you're starting to write about the land in Scotland, the history is extremely important. And then going back through the generations and back through the story of the land became increasingly important. So this particular passage is set in 1964, when the two central families from the story actually managed to take a rare walk up into the mountains. Being one of them a farming family, they very rarely get time for that. So Mr. Mac is the kind of local ecologist and prophet voice about the environment, and Agnes is, she was a Highland traveller as she grew up, and then has married into this sheep farming family. Both Mr. Mac and Agnes loved the Cairngorms, and though he was often in their lower reaches for his forestry work, she could rarely do more than gaze at them across the valley. The year Colvin, Fachi and I were 9, they took us for a longer walk than we had ever ventured before. Higher up and deeper in was Mr. Mac's rallying cry as the maps were spread across the table at Shepherd's cottage. It was September, and we set off early in the cold dark, bundling into the Macpherson's Land Rover in our coats and hats, squished in beside canvas rucksacks and their dog who panted hot breath on our knees. We drove through a thick pool of mist, over the bridge and on to Glenmore Forest, where we started walking in the grey dawn. The wood smelled of damp earth and pine. The ferns spread with cobwebs in lacy pavilions. We steadily gained height through the cloud, the path getting steeper, the trees thinner and our chatter falling away as our packs grew heavy and our breath short. Mr. Mac told stories of the wartime foresters who came from Norway, Labrador and Newfoundland, those who had married and stayed, and those who still wrote to him. Agnes told stories of the green fairy dogs and the raven stone and the old grey man of Ben Macdui. Mrs. Mac just chuckled and passed round the shortbread. And then, without warning, we stepped above the cloud into sun. I'd never seen the like of it before. The great white sea filling the strath below while we stood on a height of glory. We whooped and laughed and cast off our packs, startling a hare and causing a herd of deer to lift their heads. Joy was our companion for that walk, up into the corries and high passes, the wind-blown ridges and the summits of stone and sky.
Lovely. Kathleen, you mentioned about being, as a young parent, not being able to access wilderness, nature at large, and having to concentrate on the things nearest you. I want to ask you both about the effects of the pandemic and what's that meant. I mean, you know, that's wonderful reading by you, Merryn. It makes me just want to get my walking boots out and head for the hills. That's been denied to us for a long time. Kathleen, what effect did the pandemic have on you, both during and since the sort of lifting of restrictions? And I just wondered if you could say also something about how that has, the effect that's had on readers and writers generally when we're thinking about writing about nature.
Well, you know, the pandemic, the first lockdown we had, gosh, last April, which as a person who was not homeschooling, thank God, you know, a person in my 50s, I found it deeply silent and deeply wonderful. It actually reminded me of my early days as a writer, which were quite long and lonely. But that was all right, you know. And so I feel, speaking about the lockdown, I'm coming from a place of great safety and privilege. So I'm reluctant to do it, you know, because every night in the news, of course, there were people ill, there were people dying, and this, you know, the children being off school and the young people being stuck at home. It was awful for so many people, but not for me, you know. So to sit here and say I quite enjoyed it would be cruel. But the depth of silence that one could hear outdoors was a wonder to me. That's gone. I'm sorry to say it's gone, you know. And that business of being able to reattune to the near at hand, you know, I found that rather wonderful. You know, that's gone. As a writer, I did nothing. You know, I found it impossible to write. You know, I know I'm not alone in that. Other people. In fact, it would have been weird, I think, to say, "Oh, now I can finish my great novel when the world was in crisis." You know, that was, you know, I found it impossible to write anything. It was just a matter of endless walking, so-called an hour a day. That didn't work either. You know, but there are aspects of it which I hoped would last, which are clearly not going to last.
What do you think about, you know, how, you know, as a population, we seem to have rediscovered the natural world and the pros and cons that come with that?
Well, have we? Maybe a very few folk have, but I think by and large, you know, I don't know if we have. I don't know. We were all famous for living in our little bubbles, but I think there's a how far does this reawakening or reawareness extend? I truly don't know. Probably not far enough to make the differences that we need to make. Do I sound pessimistic? I probably am pessimistic.
Merryn, what about you? I mean, you must have had a very different experience living in the Highlands to those.
Yes, I mean, and even within our household, we had quite an interesting experience because I was very fortunate that my work as a writer means I'm here anyway, and my project was to be working on this book about Nan Shepherd. I couldn't go right up into the mountains as she did, so I couldn't kind of do all of that walking. I could just walk in my local area, and I'm very privileged that it's a beautiful area, and because it's still part of the broader Cairngorms, it still gave me some things to be paying attention to, which is what Kathleen was talking about very early on, just taking notice. And because of the restrictions on a whole lot of other aspects of my life, it just meant I took a lot of time, but also because of the inspiration of Nan Shepherd, and that was her approach to the natural world, was that attention to detail and that lengths and depths of time, really just dwelling in a place and listening to it and using all of her senses to experience it. So entering into that space personally was a real gift, you know, actually the gift of a narrower space that I couldn't walk at speed over a big mountain. I actually started doing some of the things that she would do and just lie down and just look up and take the perspective from there. But within our own household, my husband is a GP, so he was definitely not, you know, working from home or having loads more time to be, you know, wandering lonely as a cloud. You know, he was at the coalface day in, day out, and so and also doing some of the kind of COVID response things in Inverness. So that was quite interesting within the context of one household, and our sons from university came back, and so there was, on the one hand, that silence that Kathleen talked about, because we're an area that gets inundated with tourists and adventurers and holidaymakers, and well and good, you know, I think people are really entitled to access all these spaces and enjoy them, but it gets very noisy. So it was extraordinary how it all fell so quiet. But at the same time, I had teenage sons at home playing the electric guitar and, you know, all of the rest of it. So family life wasn't quiet, you know, thank goodness, like Kathleen, I wasn't trying to homeschool them. They're homeschooling me now. But so there was some quite sharp contrast, and also I had managed to have a trip back to Nepal to see my parents. It was the last kind of time they were going to be there. I got home on the 7th of March, so I got home really right before everything started shutting down. And so I was just also very acutely aware of globally the injustices that the pandemic was bringing upon us, and that I had returned to a life of enormous privilege and protection where I am here, but friends and family in Nepal and India and other parts of the world were just sliding into deeper and deeper crisis, which is ongoing. And so yes, a very strange time of, on the one hand, being able to really enjoy and be thankful for the natural world that I could enjoy, but at the same time so acutely aware of others in the world, and others even in our own context, who are suffering so much through this. But perhaps that just brings into sharp relief. That's the reality all the time. Pandemic has only just brought it into sharper focus. We all the time live in a climate crisis and in a state of global injustice on horrific scales. And I don't know, I hope, Kathleen, that we can have the energy and the commitment to be part of the remedy, that we just back into the complacency that we had before. But it takes commitment, and
it takes leadership, also political leadership, which
yes,
is what I'm not seeing.
Yes, that's right. It does, and it takes us as a population to hold our leaders to account, instead of being silent, to be very noisy about protest and how making sure that we see the change that we need to see.
So, do you think we have to be activists as well as writers, and are those two conflicting?
I think writing can be a form of activism.
I'd like to think.
And, in terms of what nature writing is and is becoming, one of the things that we were being asked to talk about was the sort of nature writing that we admire. And for me, some of what I admire are things like George Monbiot's Feral and Alistair McIntosh's Soil and Soul, which is very political, which is writing about the fact that, yes, if this planet is beautiful and we care about it and it's worth looking after, which is what a lot of nature writing focuses on, then there are very profound political implications of that, and that rests in activism. And both those guys are very active activists, but the writing in itself, the stories and the poetry and the music and the art in itself can be a form of activism.
I would like to think that, sometimes that I fear it's just nonsense and it's not going to change anything. And is the point of writing a poem to bring about change, or is the point of writing a poem just to write the poem? These are the questions that go in my head. If I thought that the kind of writing that I do and my contributors and Antlers of Water do, if I thought that was a species of activism in and of itself, I'd be very happy.
Well, I think it is. I think it is. And I think, some of the things that, I've read, like, so Chitra Ramaswamy's essay in that collection is about pregnancy, and I think one of the really interesting things is that when we're thinking about nature, and an essay that you wrote about cancer, we have to really start broadening what we mean by that. Yeah. And so often we have thought of nature and talked about nature as the thing that is out there and it's green and it's beautiful and it's not us and it's not the virus. The virus is natural too, So actually we have to be thinking more about how we are intrinsically a part of nature. We are natural. We belong here. We're not aliens or an invasive species, but we seem to behave like it quite a lot of the time. So we have to grapple with that tension too. And I think there's times when our voices have to be the voices of elegy and the voices of rage, but also the voices of celebration. So I think celebration and lamentation can work together, because it's in acknowledging the beauty and the preciousness of what we have that perhaps we recognize how fragile it is and that we'll be prepared to fight for it.
Good for you.
So I think it's all of that, Kathleen. I think a poem, even if a poem is just about an exclamation of beauty, then that in itself is raising a fist.
Good, I hope so. But,
I believe so.
and again, it's also a matter of kicking it upstairs and getting political action. You know,
Yes.
we sent a copy of Antlers of Water to every single MSP, and not one responded.
Oh, that is heartbreaking. Yeah.
The first essay that you chose to start Antlers of Water with is Tris Poichi's.
Yes.
Tell me about that, because it's an unexpected choice, perhaps, for a volume of writing about nature.
Well, as Merryn is just saying, that we have to expand our idea of nature and our place in it, you know, to include ourselves and the viruses and cancer. These are all natural occurrences. And also the changing landscape, you know, is also our doing. And this essay, Chris Fuiki, is about largely about the construction of a wind farm and the changing of a landscape in response to climate emergency. And it was important to me to have wind farms and the like in the book, and extend the idea that nature isn't something far away over there that we can go to after a 3-day hike, you know, and weirdly be there and then come out again. We're integrated into it all the time, and the changing landscape. As I mentioned culture earlier, that the erection of wind farms is a wonderful example of where nature and culture and the economy all come together. So I was very pleased when Chris submitted that essay, because he obviously was thinking along the same lines, you know, to make an understanding of this, especially Scottish landscape. God, you can't escape wind farms, you know. Yes, they're here, they're in the landscape, this is our landscape, this is our doing, you know. And to start off by saying nature is not, as I say, far away over there, you know, and inaccessible. It's here right now.
Could we talk a little bit about who is entitled to write about nature? Merryn, you've just told us where you come from, and you have written a book steeped in the Highlands, in this part of the Highlands. Did you at all feel that you know, that you should have been a Scottish-born, Scottish-based writer all your life before embarking on this, or did this just give you a fresh perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really difficult question. Who's entitled to write what about anything, you know? And I would kind of say, well, yeah, you know, don't wait for entitlement. Right, you know, you've got something to write about it. And I think I find it a fascinating place where I live, because there's so many intersections of families that have been here for generations, and then incomers who've married in, and lots of crossovers and connections. Because of my upbringing and because of having lived in cities like Melbourne, which is really multicultural, you know, I passionately believe that the world is a better place because of movement and change and cross-pollination and new people coming. And, you know, we need prophets like Kathleen. We need the prophet in their own land, and we need the prophetic voices that come from somewhere else. And I'm not necessarily saying that I'm that, but I am saying that sometimes you need outsiders to come along and go, why are you doing this way?
Yes,
this is
absolutely.
really strange. And I remember very vividly when I was first walking in Scotland going, why aren't there trees? You know? And actually some people almost kind of doing a double take, because they're so accustomed to this landscape, which is often described as a very beautiful landscape. And yes, it is, but it's a denuded landscape in some respects, a monocultural landscape. And it's not a natural landscape, which covers most of Scotland. And the other thing that I was astonished to find out when I was walking through lots of spaces in Scotland was how much of it was privately owned. I remember saying to people, what? Like everything I can see is owned by one person, you know? So sometimes you actually kind of need that little grit in the oyster that's come from somewhere else. You just sometimes need these other voices that cast a perspective on your space and your culture, and ask questions, and perhaps go where angels fear to tread, out of, you know, the blissfulness of ignorance sometimes. So yeah, I'm not entitled to write anything that I write, but I just write it because it rises as an urge, as a desire. And I think for me, I often write out of curiosity. I often write because I break that rule about write what you know. I write what I want to find out, you know, and I'm curious and I want to learn, and I start writing something, and then I think, I'm writing a story about a shepherd, but I don't know enough. I don't know what shepherds do all day. So then I go to the shepherds that live across the road from me. There's sheep wandering in my garden and things like that. And, you know, you start having lots of conversations and following people around and taking time and listening to them. And, you know, and reading extraordinary books like Isolation Shepherd, Ian Thompson, which I just find an extraordinary work of nature writing, whatever that is. But so for me, there's this research process as well that backfills, you know, my ignorance, the things that I don't know, the curiosity. But there's also a fundamental thing that makes us all the same. We're all human, you know, and to suggest that you can't grow into and learn into other places and other stories and cast light on them and enliven them, you know, that's very limiting. So yeah, I'm prepared to take on the challenge, but that I can't write this story. But also then you have to start saying, well, what stories can I write if I'm only left to write autobiography, because I've lived through so many different places and spaces. And I think that would be very limiting if we confine people to only writing about themselves.
Absolutely, yes. I actually think it's catastrophic. You know, we seem to be in this business of entitlement makes me froth at the mouth. You know, what does that mean? Who says, you know, I don't know, I truly don't understand this business. No writer that I've ever met has ever been entitled to write about anything. You just bloody do it, you know, just put your head down and charge, you know, whether you're a teenager in your back bedroom or whether you're, you know, in your mid-50s right now, you just do it. I'm sorry, I will start ranting about that. And writers are wonderful at thinking of excuses not to do it. And I'm not entitled, or you have to be entitled as a wonderful, wonderful, rotten excuse. So I am starting to rant now, haven't I? So write out of fear, write out of anger, write out of frustration, write out of curiosity, you know, but just do it. That's why I'm not a very good teacher of writing. Just do it.
Antlers, again, you had some really interesting contributions there. I'm thinking about Jacqueline Bain,
Yes.
who's writing about immobility,
Yes,
and nature,
yes.
which I don't think I've read before.
Writing about, Jacqueline was writing from a place where she can't walk terribly far. And as we move away, thankfully, from the striding out over the moors model of nature writing, I was anxious to find writing from a person who just couldn't do that. And there's one or two people in the book who have mobility problems or chronic disease problems and can't stride out. And Jacqueline was becoming fascinated by a wasp's bike in her wee garden. That is absolutely nature writing, is it not? That acute attention, which turns into fascination, which turns into love, you know. Yes, it's crucial. You know, we can't run out of wasps, and we need people to fly the flag for wasps, if I can put it like that, you know, and to understand that perhaps if mobility is an issue, that doesn't stop you. In fact, there may be an enabling thing in Jacqueline's situation. Good for her.
How important is self in writing about nature?
Ah.
Yeah, about, you know, you, the writer, and your writer's gaze on the landscape, on the natural world.
Well, it is interesting that Merryn's working in fiction, and that may be a way to go. A way to go to get ourselves out of what seems to me to be a bit of a cul-de-sac of endless first-person narratives, which started in a great democratizing. Everyone can do a first-person narrative and nobody can gainsay it. Nobody can say, oh, you're not entitled, or I'm too entitled. Any of that nonsense. Anyone can do it. But the upshot is that now we are almost inundated with first-person narratives, you know, often in the present tense. And the writer in me, the stylist in me, is balking at that now. And saying, can we just do something different? You know, because it is becoming individualized and almost cacophonous. So how do we do something slightly different? How do we foreground the natural world but not foreground the self? always I. You know? So that, as I say, if Merryn's moving into fiction, is that a way of doing it? This is a question of style.
I've always been writing fiction. Now I'm moving into non-fiction, and so that is definitely a challenge. And you know, in this work, kind of responding to Nan Shepherd's work, is really interesting observing how she writes, because on the one hand, it's not autobiographical in that she tells us very little about her life beyond her encounter with the mountain. But on the other hand, it's extraordinarily personal in that she takes us right inside herself, because she takes us into the experience of the mountain through her body, so that we experience it through her senses, through her eyes, her touch. So it's very intimate in some ways, but she's not telling us about anything to do with her personal life, her psychological dramas or traumas, you know. And so there's a very strong confessional element in a lot of the nature writing that's happening now, where people are working through and working out issues in their own lives, you know. And I think, well, it's a big world, and we've got space for all different kinds of books and all different kinds of writing. So I you know, have no critique of that as an approach, and I find some of that very interesting. But what I have found quite fascinating about her is that we learn nothing about her biography, but a great deal about her inner working in terms of that very profound connection with the material world. She's very material, very tangible, very immersed. So so I found that really interesting. But I think also in terms of encouraging people to write, I would just sort of encourage people not to judge the process at all, to just write. And if it starts out by feeling like it's very personal and it's very individual and it's just about you, then not to worry about that. Just to that's perhaps part of a process of you finding your feet as a writer, finding your voice as a writer, and exploring a space. But you may also want to pass through that, so that the writing, then the camera, in a sense, shifts away from you to whatever it is that is really interesting to you and that you're really wanting to observe in the world around you. So, you know, I think we've got space for all different kinds of writing, but, you know, you're right that it's good to keep challenging people to find new perspectives and new ways of talking about the experience. I think, I wonder if it's partly because, you know, one of the questions that Jenny had put to us in the preparation for this is, you know, why this proliferation of, you know, nature writing currently. And I think there's perhaps a sense in which people are trying to find themselves and trying to find where they fit and where they belong. And I think that there's profound need that I would call a spiritual need, but I know that word's problematic for lots of people. But I think a profound spiritual need for connection to one another, connection to the earth, to the planet, to this thing that we live in and on and are a part of, you know, in connection to whatever depth or sense of transcendence or meaning that we might find. And so I think a lot of that voice, the first person present tense, is about trying to find your place in the world. Who am I? Where am I going? How do I belong? I wonder if that's partly where it comes from.
Well, my friend Mark Cocker is a nature writer, and he was saying the other day in a webinar not dissimilar to this, that nature writing has become a sort of entry level for new writers. And this is, you're putting that very elegantly and very generously, but it's a place, because it's become so democratized and because you don't need any fancy, you know, anything really, just your own senses. It's a place where many writers can do it exactly that, you know, just start writing, not have to worry about first person, and just do it. And I think that's possibly the case. Yes, it's become a place where you don't need any special equipment. You can just do it. And as you say, but I'm interested in the fact that then you can possibly move beyond that into a different perspective, a different voice, different style. And as you talk about Nan Shepherd deepening out, so I'm beginning to wonder if our first person consciousness is, and all our various identities are superficial. And do we have a deeper layer of human seeing, doing, being in the world, which actually transcends that? Transcends is not the right word, but deepens out of that.
This would be a good time to bring in some of the comments and chat we've been having. Jackie says, really interesting conversation, thank you. I hear plenty of fresh thinking and new creative responsibilities emerging from the pandemic experience. Somebody else asks, could I ask the panelists, would they agree that you should not, and indeed cannot, look for inspiration to write about, that nature speaks to you and it will come to you through almost daydreaming, observing, experiencing and not searching? Ties into what you've just been saying, Kathleen.
Yes, inspiration is the great red herring, I think. You know, it's almost pathological, it's waiting to be struck by lightning or something. No, I do not believe in inspiration. I believe in other things that we have been listing before. Frustration, curiosity, excitement, almost everything. But if you wait to be inspired, you'll wait till doomsday.
Merryn, as somebody who was writer in residence at the Cairngorms, and I know you did a lot of writing with different groups in the community, what would you say about inspiration?
I think the word community is actually quite an important part of it. I'm just going to wave this at you. This is the anthology that came out of that project, Shared Stories, A Year in the Cairngorms, which you can get through the Cairngorms Trust if you look on their website, just for a donation. It was really exciting coming together with other people, all different kinds of people. And one of the important things about the project was that we invited everyone to the table, you know, land-based workers, kids, older folks, all different kinds of things. And we tried to make it as accessible as possible and to listen to every voice. And just lots of the things that came out in those workshops, there was just a lot of laughs, lots of just different perspectives and experiences. And a lot of people, some of whom are in this, who just had never, ever thought to write before, or thought of themselves as creative or artistic, or thought of themselves as having any kind of special relationship with nature. So yeah, we kind of booted that whole entitlement thing out the door. And we just said, come and enjoy, you know, and whatever your encounter, whatever your experience, and whatever your understanding of that word nature is, it's valid for you to come and share in this process and to share your ideas and to share your words. And through the course of the project, I was kind of encouraging two different things. One was go for it, just do it. Like Kathleen was saying, just write, no judgment, just go with the flow, and what comes, comes, and you'll be surprised at some of the gems in that. Definitely don't wait for inspiration. It's like waiting for a bus in the Highlands. But also, I invented a new poetic form through the project called the Cairngorms lyric, which is kind of like a haiku, but it's 15 words. And if you go on my website, you can see what that's all about. But and it had to have one word of non-English origin. So often it was the kind of Gaelic place names. And because it was only 15 words, that was quite liberating for people to think, okay, I probably can't write an essay, but I think I could probably come up with 15 words, or I don't think I could write poetry, but I can probably write 15 words. You know, so sometimes just giving yourself permission to start small, just try a little thing, try a haiku or a Cairngorms lyric or something, or just a sentence. You know, sometimes when in my old days as a teacher, I would give people writing journals and say, just one word a day, just one word. See if you can just put one word down. Because most time, if you just decide you're going to write down one word, a few more come. So yeah, I think just permission, let it be easy. Don't try to be the next a major nature writer. Just your honest response and reflection about what you're experiencing is valid in itself, whatever it may become or wherever it may go. But on the point of where it may go, you know, we were saying that, yes, there are now increasing opportunities for people to be writing about nature. And so if anybody wants to look for places where you might start reading what's kind of out there, but also opportunities for you to submit your work, I've actually, I used to have it all on a document that I would hand out in workshops, but now it's on a page on my website. So if you go to my website, merrynglover.com, there's a thing called under About Resources for Writers, and there's a page there which I've just been starting to list lots of different websites, online journals, things like that, where people might like to start submitting stuff. But I come back to the word community, get with other people, get into a writing group or an online group or a Facebook groups, whatever is your thing, wherever you feel comfortable, and just start sharing that process. And that can be hugely encouraging and inspiring for people.
Great, thank you. There's two comments, two questions I'd like to take together. Can nature writing and grief writing go hand in hand in an effort to comfort and to help those suffering? And that was one question. And Geraldine says, I'm trying to write a short story inspired by my son who died drowned off the West Coast. I want to draw on his love of nature and his work for a while as a lobster fisherman, as well as his work with human rights in Colombia. So it will be about lobsters here in Colombia, which he tried often to tell me about. Any tips? Now, I think it's interesting. We've got two comments about marrying together grief, coming to terms with grief, and writing about nature. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, either of you, about that?
Yeah, as we've said before, go for it. It's really heartbreaking material to grapple with, but often writing is an extremely valuable way of dealing with grief. I think it's important to honor for yourself that grief and that precious loved one is uppermost, and that you're writing first and foremost to go on that journey of grief. Mm-hmm. Don't put upon yourself any sense of pressure or expectation about where it might go, or trying to get it published, or what other people are going to think about it. You may discover that it's not meant to go anywhere else, that it is your story and it's important for you to write it, and that maybe that's where it stays, or you share it with some loved ones. But yeah, please stay true to what you need to say and how you need to honor that loved one and to walk that process in your writing, and don't allow external pressures to get in the way.
Yes, I would entirely agree. Please remove from yourself any thought about publication at this, or anything at this juncture. It may happen, it may not, but that's the last thing you want when you're going deep into that experience and deep into that writing, is to have a reader, ghostly reader or ghostly editor at your shoulder going, that's not right, do that. Please remove that from yourself. You know, it's a big enough task as it is without any external pressures like that.
Thank you both. Tom says, thank you so much, Kathleen and Merryn, fascinating discussion. You've both talked about the importance of noticing and acute attention to your immediate surroundings. How did you hone this power of noticing and recognizing what's significant to write about? And how did you develop those skills? Kathleen, could you tackle that one first?
I think you can train yourself to notice. I'm also mindful that other people have, impairments that prevent good vision. I'm not great with colour, for example, but nonetheless, I think you can train yourself, and it's probably just a matter of permission. Permission is a massive, important word. Giving yourself permission to write a book is enormous, but giving yourself permission to stop and look at a weed growing through a pavement crack is also crucial. And so often we don't do that. Why not? Give yourself permission to take a minute when something catches your eye or catches your ear to tune into it, and you can train that up. Many professional people have trained that up, pathologists, ornithologists, naturalists, archaeologists. All these professions are professions which have trained up noticing to start with. And we can do that in our ordinary lives, just by stopping for a wee minute. You don't even have to go, oh, this is me stopping to notice a daisy, just do it for just a wee minute and say, that's okay, yeah, nice daisy.
Yes, I think Kathleen may will remember, you know, that stage when you've got small children. So go for a walk with a small child and they will stop you all the time because there's a little row of ants, you know.
Yes, gravel was always their kids, their fascinations.
So yes, adopting the perspective of a child and the slowness of a child and the child's capacity to completely forget about everything else because this thing right here is really interesting and we're going to explore it completely. But I'm reminded of Simone Weil's words. I think it was that attention is the highest form of generosity, you know, so it's that giving yourself permission, but also opening yourself to the kind of the abundance of the world, that when you really take time, and if you've ever like tipped a snowdrop upside down so that you can see the patterns inside it and things like that, the more you take time to take notice and pay attention, the more the world gives. And so in that sense, the easier it becomes because the delight grows.
Somebody's just asked something I was about to ask. Do either of you carry a notebook or a voice recorder with you to be able to remember something?
I preach about carrying notebooks, and I don't do it myself.
Oh,
no. Unless I'm going on a specific research project in which I've got a slightly different head. But day to day, I don't. And I have an abundance of beautiful notebooks that people have given me over the years, lying there untouched.
Yeah, I vary. I've always got paper and pen. I've always got something on me that I could capture something, or a phone. You know, it's actually been quite useful to learn how to just put things into notes or even voice record something. I do have some way of trying to capture things generally, not necessarily a writer's notebook with me all the time, but just a little tip on the notebook front. Don't buy yourself beautiful, exquisite notebooks because they will remain untouched. Buy really cheap notebooks from the supermarket. Because then you feel, oh, it's okay, you can sully it.
That's right. Yes. If you've got kittens on it, you like kittens. I'm a great one for the backs of old envelopes. In fact, I use them, you know, you can see that. This is my drafting process, backs of old envelopes, because then you're not frightened of spoiling something. Gorgeous.
Yeah. Scrap paper is really good too.
We're almost out of time, and there's so many questions I haven't asked you both that I wanted to get your opinion on. So can we just end by, Merryn, you've given us an indication already, but could you say maybe just 2 books that you think that anybody interested in this area of writing should read?
From Australia, Position Doubtful by Kim Mahood, Mapping Landscapes and Memories. She's also a visual artist, and it's a really interesting study of her time in the central desert of Australia, where she grew up amongst Indigenous communities there, engaging with Indigenous artists and understanding landscape through a whole range of different stories and perspectives. Absolutely fantastic.
Wonderful. Kathleen.
As you perhaps know, the essay form is mine. I won't write longer lengths. And the people who taught me to write essays when it was deeply unfashionable in the UK were 2 Americans. One, the late Barry Lopez, and his best work, I think, is short essay form, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words. Annie Dillard's short essays as well. So for me, it's a form thing, finding an enabling form. You know, don't necessarily think you have to write a book. That's exhausting. You know, if you're not like a sports people, like athletes, you have a natural length. Some are for the marathon, some are sprinters. You know, if you find that you're a middle distance runner, then that's your thing. Find a form that suits your voice and your mind.
Thinking of Annie Dillard, it brings us full circle, because I think about her famous words, "We are here to witness," which is what we've been talking about the last hour. Thank you, everybody, for watching for the last hour. But Merryn and Kathleen, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I just wish we had longer.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, folks.